Hi guys, below you see the completed THuG Zero 5-inch frame, and I'll put the link to the frame overview up here somewhere if you haven't seen it. But basically I've gone ahead and built this up, and I'm pretty pleased with the results. I've got a few little bits and bobs to finish off, but they're probably things that I'll tweak following a test flight, as a test flight tends to sort of bring to light any issues or annoyances that you've got. But I've got to say, I really like the way this has turned out. The frame feels really sturdy in all the right places. It really does sort of lock together tightly when you've got the components in. And in this current configuration with separate ESCs and a really heavy TBS Unify full-size antenna, this weighs 321 grams. So it's a fair bit lighter than my other freestyle frames, probably by about 30 grams or so. And that 30 grams is, you know, half a GoPro. In terms of the build, as you can see, I've used separate ESCs on this, and I did that for two reasons. One, these ESCs are the ones that Raymond FPV kindly sent me, and these are the Acon 30 amp BL Heli S ESCs, and I've never used Acon ESCs for two reasons. One, they don't really sell them in the UK. I think there's only one place that does them, and that's a shop that I've never actually used before. And two, they're really expensive. So this is going to be interesting to see. Generally my favourite singular ESC or SpeedX, the 30 or 25 amp, and I really like them. I've never lost one yet, even when I get stuck in a tree and the props are hitting branches as I'm trying to spin my way out. I've never smoked an ESC using SpeedX, so it'll be interesting to see how these guys stand out in comparison to the rest that I've used, and whether I can feel any difference in the air. As you can see, this frame itself, we've got four separate ESCs, the Acon ones. I've used a Runcam micro, and as you can see, the stack itself is 20mm, and it's basically just the perfect height. So when you put your props on, your props basically sit very slightly below the top plate. So if you're one of those guys who worries about hitting your battery with your props in a crash or anything like that, then you don't have to worry. As you can see, this one's got my beautiful name on it, which I absolutely love. Such a nice touch in a world of kind of mass-produced rubbish. I think it's really sweet that you can have your name engraved in it, and something that I wish more frame designers did. I think it's a really nice touch. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take the top plate off, and then you can see the components. We'll talk a little bit about that and the pros and cons. But yeah, overall I really like it. Right, so here you have the top plate removed, and that's just removed by these three bolts. And as you can see, the battery lead is attached to the top plate via this 3D printed mount. The rest of this basically just lifts out, and it basically all just clips in together like so. So you can see, if I just disconnect the camera, if I can get it out, it basically just, so you've got this two side plates which hold the camera and clip into the top plate. We've got a little VTX plate which you run your VTX antenna through, and the rest of it is pretty straightforward. So what we've got here in terms of this build is we've got a CL Racing F4S, we've got a TBS Unify high voltage, and we've got a little 680 UF capacitor, and as I said, the Runcam, and underneath I'm running an XM Plus receiver. Now this particular flight controller I had lying around for testing, so I didn't buy this specifically for this build. And there's pros and cons to this flight controller. If you've read it, the flight controller itself is a really good one. It's got 4 UARTs, it's got 160 amp PDB. It's got a current sensor which I think goes up to 130 amp, and it's one unique feature, direct camera control. So basically you can bring up the on-screen display of your camera via your transmitter and change your camera settings without using the dongle and the little OSD pad that Foxy and Runcam cameras come with. The board itself is really full featured. However, what you tend to find is all the things that you want are along these two lines here, which makes it relatively straightforward, but also means that you end up with kind of a lot of wires in the same space. And I find it a little bit, it's not difficult to solder in the slightest, but you end up with a kind of little bit of a scruffy build. There's a lot of wiring coming out and it ends up looking a little bit like a bird's nest. In terms of the way that I've mounted it, if you flip back to my initial review, the THuG frame, they recommended using the M3 nylon bolts and an M3 nylon washer, but I was never particularly happy with attaching my arms just using 4 metal bolts here and then 4 nylon screws here. And there are plenty of people who've contacted me out there running the 6, 7, 8-inch version with no issues yet, but to play safe I thought I'd use an additional 4 metal screws, so that's added some weight. And basically, because we've got a limited amount of room inside because of the way the top plate sort of reduces your stack height, instead of using aluminium nylocking nuts, what I've basically just used is 4 normal metal nuts, and I've just Loctited those, and then on top of that I've just put a little 4 little soft mounts, and then just use the yellow sort of grommets or soft mounts that the F4S flight controller comes with. There is enough room in this stack if you wanted to run a 4-in-1 ESC. It will be relatively tight, but if you're an experienced builder you won't really have any issues putting a 4-in-1 ESC into it. The TBS Unify is, I'm guessing this frame is designed specifically around the TBS Unify, because when you put these side plates on, it's so tight against the Unify, but that you don't need to use any additional mounting whatsoever for the Unify. You don't need to use 3M foam tape or tie wraps or anything like that, because it literally wedges in so tight that it would take a bomb to move it. But the build itself kind of works really nicely. Everything kind of has its place. It's a pretty tight build, and as I said, because I'm using these additional nuts at the bottom, that forced me to raise the stack a little bit higher than I usually would do, and instead of wasting that space there, I've simply stuck my XM Plus receiver beneath the flight controller and obviously run the antenna wires out to the side and zip tied them in as normal. The other unusual thing is, or not unusual, but the other thing that I had to do is, because the battery terminals on this flight controller are basically beneath it and they're here, I've had to run the battery, the power leads underneath the board and out to this 3D printed mount, which I haven't screwed in yet, but I will do so. So all in all, I've got to say I really like it. I think it's a really clever design. I mean, it's everything has been sort of made to measure in a way. The tolerances are extremely tight, and there isn't really much room to do anything beyond what it's designed to do. It's not a frame that you're going to be able to put in, you know, any VTX or any camera, etc. It's specifically designed for what it's designed for, which I'm guessing is a TBS Unify, a 4-in-1 ESC and a flight controller, or something like I'm using here. And as I said before, this particular camera mount is really designed for a Foxy or a Runcam Mini as opposed to the Micro, but all I've done is just use 2 soft mounts, a soft mount either side to fill in that little bit of space, and that's fine. So as you might be able to see from my camera, it's pretty sunny outside, and it's supposed to be sunny all week, but sadly we're running 25-30 mile an hour winds at the moment, and the areas that I tend to fly in fact most of Norfolk is flat as a pancake, so you tend to get really strong gusty winds. So when I do test fly this, it's likely to be not the nicest footage in the world, so I'll probably wait until a calmer day to post some flight footage. But yeah, hope that was useful. But as I said, I really like the frame. I think it all clips together really nicely, but you need to be really careful of your components. But it is a really lightweight frame. You know, if you want something with a bit more space, or you want to run a bigger battery than a 1300 or a very small 1500, then, you know, look at the Aliens and that type of frame. But just be aware that they're a fair bit heavier than this one. So all I can say at this point is, if you don't like it, thug off. Cheers guys, thanks, bye bye.